Big changes are happening in Notre Dame recruiting. Mike Martin is taking over as general manager. The NIL strategy is evolving. 2026 quarterback commit Noah Grubbs is rising up the ranks, and Mike Mickens is getting national recognition. Brian Smith and I break it all down on today's Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, and welcome in to Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and currently a producer at Fox Sports, and today is Thursday, February 27th. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. If you have not already, be sure to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. And coming up on today's show, Locked On recruiting insider Brian Smith joins me to discuss why Notre Dame hasn't seen an immediate recruiting boost after its national championship run and the impact of Chad Bowden at USC. We'll also break down what to expect from the new general manager, Mike Martin, and whether his NIL strategy could shift Notre Dame's approach, plus a deep dive on 2026 quarterback Noah Grubbs, Mike Mickens' rise as a recruiter, Chris Ash taking over as defensive coordinator, and Ja'Juan Seider's early impact as the running backs coach. Plenty to get to, so let's get started. All right, recruiting insider Brian Smith is back with me here. And Brian, it seems like some Notre Dame fans have become a little restless because there really hasn't been much recruiting news to talk about since Notre Dame's deep run in the college football playoff. And I'll admit, I understand it to some degree because typically teams that make a national championship run see an immediate boost in recruiting. But why hasn't Notre Dame experienced that to the same effect so far?
Well, for one, Notre Dame just came off a long playoff run. It's different than it used to be. And two, the month of February is a complete different deal because it's a dead period. So Notre Dame had like one junior day, and then we go into a dead period. For the entire month of February, it's just contact via phone, messages, emails, stuff like that. So I'm not really surprised. Not many schools get a whole lot of bump, and Notre Dame is waiting on the junior days. They're going to happen in March. That's kind of their normal deal. And they're not going to, and I know this, we're going to get into this anyway, they're not going to just throw upfront money at a bunch of kids. That's just not going to happen. So I'll give you an example. There was a kid at the end of this past cycle that everybody wanted. He turned down 1.3 million just to sign with the school because he got a much higher offer from somebody else. So if you want to complain about that or disagree with that, you can go ahead, but Notre Dame doesn't really do it that way. So we can argue about it, but that's their strategy. But as far as the immediate bump, it's more the dead period than anything else.
Yeah, we'll dive into that strategy here shortly. But as for the news that Notre Dame has received since that run, it's actually been mostly negative, with the one exception being Tyler Merrill's commitment to Notre Dame. But with Chad Bowden now at USC, we have seen a couple of Notre Dame's top prospects either publicly commit to the Trojans, like defensive end Simote Katoanga, or start trending that direction like wide receiver Trent Mosley. Do you think this is a product of Bowden leveraging his connection to Notre Dame against the Irish, or does it have more to do with their desire to stay close to home? Because we're talking about two kids from Southern California.
I think a lot of it is NIL, and I think a lot of it is just relationships. It's the same thing in recruiting. Chad's an excellent recruiter. He's part of it, but that's USC. It's not shocking, and they're right down the road. So for them to get a kid is not that. But NIL, they will throw around a lot more upfront money than what Notre Dame does, so I think that's part of it, especially with the D-line game. A lot of those kids, it's 100% about money. So Notre Dame at some point is going to have to cross that bridge. Mosley, I don't know as much about, but I talked to Grubbs the other day, and I mean, they're in on a bunch of receivers they really like. If they don't get him, that would suck, but they're in a great spot with receivers. I'm not as worried about that one as I am losing any really good defensive lineman.
Mark Shervin has already hired a replacement to Chad Bowden as general manager, and Mike Martin, the former executive with the Detroit Lions. And even though the move has not been made official yet, he's already been on the job for over a week now. How involved do you expect Martin to be in high school recruiting compared to Chad Bowden?
That is one of the big questions because they're going to split the role, like a director of recruiting and the GM, probably a little bit more of an NIL guy. But at the same time, you have to be involved. This is a new deal. There is no answer because there's no evidence of it yet at Notre Dame. And then the other part, how much does Marcus want the person to be involved initially, and how much does that evolve? These are all new things. I don't know what it's going to be because I've talked to a bunch of people at different schools, and everybody tweaks it their own way. So it's more personnel based and personalities than anything else. So I don't know if the GM will be a ton of information on it, but a lot of schools are using them again for NIL purposes, because I won't get into specifics. I had an SEC coach tell me one of his biggest time consumption deals was dealing with fires because of NIL. The third uncle calls up, mom or whatever, we're going to leave if we don't get more money stuff. It's too much on the coaches. That's why these GMs are coming in to handle a lot of that. And I'm sure he'll evaluate too, because he did such a good job with where he was before. But at the same time, NIL is such a cumbersome deal, and it's lawyers and contracts and agents. And then people, quite honestly, have zero business talking money. And again, the third uncle. So it's unfortunate, but you got to have him for that. Hopefully, because of his track record, he can help a lot with evaluations, but I wouldn't count on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think one of the main reasons why Notre Dame went out and got him is his NFL background. He's been with the league for over 2 decades. So I think the adjustment going from the NFL, scouting those type of players, to scouting potentially high school is a big change, and I'm sure something that he'll have to get accustomed to. But I think the way that he structures the entire department is something that I'm personally very interested in, because when Chad Bowden got promoted, it was mainly to keep him away from going to Michigan. It seems like now Marcus Freeman has a pretty brand new vision as to what he wants it to look like. So what changes do you expect to see in the way that Martin structures Notre Dame's personnel department as a whole?
Well, I think the biggest thing is getting the right people in the right places. Just because you hired somebody and you like them doesn't mean there could be some shifting. I imagine after spring, maybe even early summer, after the summer camps, there'll be some changing of roles, whether the titles change or not. It's just from interaction. That's part one. And part two, he probably has an idea on, this is almost always the case, managers want the administration to give them more money for more people. That fight with Notre Dame usually goes very slow as I'm sure you know, in the history of Notre Dame football. It's not normally the way it goes, but it needs to be quicker. Like, they're too reactionary is a topic that's on every message board, and it's true. When was the last time Notre Dame was a trend center with spending money in recruiting? Probably been a long time. It's just the way they've always been. But if they can get the right staff, maybe he has an extra person that helps with the coaches to recruit, like a defensive personnel person, like certain schools do. You recruit this side of the ball just with film, evaluations. It's a back office. We're adding more people. And I imagine he'll probably bring in some NFL guys to do that. Maybe some NFL people in general. It doesn't have to be guys. It can be a little bit of everything. There are women involved in this now that are really, really good at it. The question is how many and exactly how are they going to do it? I don't know if they'll do sides of the ball. Some teams do, but there are a lot of different options. And he's been highly successful. Think about what the Lions were just a few years ago. I mean, they were awful. And now they're one of the best teams in the NFL. If your personnel department isn't really good, you have no chance at that. So you got to give them credit.
All right, coming up, how will Mike Martin handle NIL? Plus, what sets 2026 quarterback commit Noah Grubbs apart from the rest of the class? We're going to dive into it right after this. Today's episode is brought to you by Roy. Attention Irish fans, the future of college sports is here, and it is transparent. Before the Roy app, NIL negotiations often happened under the table, and fans didn't have a clear way to directly support the athletes they love. Now with Roy, you get to be part of the change and support Irish athletes in the most transparent way possible. Roy, the NIL app, allows you to choose the player you want to support, decide how much to contribute, and receive exclusive content from the athletes you support. The best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back. It's a risk-free way to show your support. The Roy app is giving fans control. No more uncertainty. Now you can provide transparent, impactful support and help shape the team and the future of college sports with your contributions. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing Notre Dame athletes the way they deserve, with transparency, trust, and a real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players. Given Notre Dame's traditional approach to NIL, we've already talked about it to some degree. Do you see Martin making any major changes, even if they're not willing to give high school recruits that much upfront money? Or do you think that it's going to pretty much remain the same and prioritize player retention and the transfer portal?
I think it will change some. They already did before he was hired. With certain kids, they're going to pay them. Here's the key. The word pay player is still extremely broad. It will be a case-by-case basis. If anybody wants a blueprint on how it's going to work specifically, that does not exist. Every single kid is a new agenda. How it gets paid, if they're going to do certain things, if there's going to be sponsors, it is very complex. So every person is different. There is no one answer. With that being stated, it's not a Notre Dame thing either. You can pay over a certain amount of time, or you get a higher number if you stay through year 3. There's all kinds of things like that you can do. But I think it will be a little bit more prioritized towards premium positions. Offensive tackle, defensive tackle, pass rusher, corner. These aren't really hard things to figure out. Quarterback kind of speaks for itself, but Notre Dame doesn't struggle to recruit that spot quite as much. But like D lineman, I mean, I know a kid that just for 1 year was a backup, got offered $500K last year, and he didn't leave the school he was at for 1 year. And he was a quasi starter. Like D-line, you have to completely overpay for because there's so few of them. Notre Dame prefers to do that with the portal, but in my opinion, they need to go get a 5-star D lineman regardless, at least every other year. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think that the difference there for Notre Dame, the conundrum that they're going to find themselves in is if they're not willing to pay high school players upfront money, specifically defensive linemen, they're going to have to pay that later on with a player in the transfer portal, and they're probably going to have to overpay because, to your point, those are the most expensive in high school and in the transfer portal, and I think Notre Dame was dealing with that this year. Everyone knew that they needed multiple defensive tackles. They went out and they got Jared Dawson, who's a good player from Louisville, and then they had to kind of take a flyer on a reserve player from USC in Elijah Hughes, who I'm sure wasn't cheap either, even though he's only appeared in like 8 college football games in his career. So how do you think Notre Dame is going to address that specifically as it pertains to defensive tackles? Because they're going to have to overpay at some point. And the thing is, there's a lot more high school defensive tackles than there are college defensive tackles in the portal, at least of the quality that they want.
Yeah, there wasn't an elite defensive tackle in the portal in the winter window. Literally, there was not one. I think that's probably going to open their eyes. So at some point, you can scream at the wall all you want. The wall's not going to talk back to you. The options are very simple. Either you overpay or you lose eventually. Because, like, if you look at the national title game, which defensive tackle group was deeper and which one had more NFL talent? The team that paid. Ohio State ran a massive deficit last year for football. Massive. There is no shortcut here. You have to overpay. So I agree. Eventually, you're going to have to do it with high school. Ohio State did it with both. And let's be honest, they overpaid because Michigan won it the year before. Let's not. Yeah. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. If Michigan hadn't won it, Ohio State probably wouldn't have done what they did, but that's another story. Notre Dame's going to have to do this at some point, and they've done a good job of developing, but eventually you got to consistently get top 50 kids. There's about 5 or 6 schools that get about half of the really elite D linemen, and they repeat themselves in the playoff in the top 5 of the rankings. D-line recruiting is almost more important than quarterback because quarterback is really hit or miss. D-line's a little higher rate. Georgia, Bama, LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, Texas. These are not very hard picks. So if you look at the teams that win it, those are the ones that oftentimes get the elite D-linemen. Now it's spread out a little bit, but even Penn State's paying some. They were one of the last holdouts like they have to eventually make that move in some capacity. And again, each kid's different, but if Notre Dame doesn't, I'll be surprised. I imagine Martin will push it that direction is my guess. I don't know the guy, but he's not going to be a fool and see, well, why aren't we getting any of these at this one spot? It's 100% because of NIL.
Yeah, and I think there's a misconception around Ohio State because they became the best team that money can buy, which is true. They were pretty open about the fact that they spent $20 million, but it's not like they built their team in the transfer portal. A lot of money that they paid was to retain specifically guys in the defensive line like JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer. They could have been in the NFL. Instead, they paid them to come back, and those were guys that were top recruits when they were in high school that they were able to get, develop them, and then they turned out how they turned out. That was one of the best defensive lines in college football and certainly gave Notre Dame fits in that game. But I want to shift the conversation to Noah Grubbs because you were just able to see him in person. What were your biggest takeaways from his performance?
Consistency. Noah is very calm, and he's so used to being in front of the spotlight. Doesn't matter if he's talking to me or if he's talking to John Garcia or Andrew Ivins or anybody else. He knows how to handle the microphone. And when any drill comes up, he's the guy they always have lead it. He shows other kids what to do. He's been trained for a long time. Balin Trujillo is a guy that he's trained with in the Orlando area, does a really good job, and he's just very accurate. His motion is consistent, play after play after play after play. I only saw him throw one bad ball out of all the throws I saw him throw, like 50 throws, 40 throws, whatever it was. He's very consistent, and he's down to 200 pounds. He's very lean. Now he said he's going to try to go back up slowly with muscle. He's a kid that will end up starting for Notre Dame, I think, multiple years. He's the entire package of what you want as a pro-style pocket quarterback who can move the pocket some and run a little bit. But, yeah, he's a great kid. He fits Notre Dame to a T.
And Notre Dame clearly prioritized Grubbs early in the 2026 cycle. The fact that he committed back in June of 2024, that feels like an eternity ago, and he still has so much more high school football left to play. But there were other top quarterback prospects who were interested in the Irish, including Bell out of American Heritage in Florida. So what do you think the Notre Dame staff saw in him so early on that separates him from all the other top quarterbacks in the class?
Part of it's just in-person evaluation. Marcus Freeman and his staff really go into that. And it doesn't surprise me because every time I see Grubbs, he's consistent. So maybe he was just a day that he came for camp and all that. It was really good. But I also think, again, the fit is there. He's a guy that really fits Notre Dame on and off the field. The high school he goes to, Lake Mary, it's a really good community just north of Orlando. I think that's a big part of it too. Quarterback is the face of your program. I don't care what school it is, Ole Miss, South Carolina, wherever. The face of your program has got to be somebody you trust. And Grubbs could fit any school in the country. So he's a safe pick from that. And Notre Dame leaned on that, I think, part of their evaluation as much, if not more, than what he did when he was throwing the football. He'll do well for Notre Dame in all avenues.
The way you talk about Grubbs kind of reminds me of the way that people talked about C.J. Carr when he was coming up as a recruit. And I think the one trait that C.J. Carr had that really separated himself from the pack was accuracy. Is there one physical trait from Grubbs that really stands out to you?
I would just say how he throws the ball in the middle of the field. He reads it well, and he'll gun it between guys that other people won't. It's a combination. You got to read it right, because if you don't read it early enough, those throws go the other direction. But he'll thread the needle, and CJ did a lot of that too. If you have the ability to read a defense early enough, you can lead a guy past the defender on the backside of it. He'll make those kind of throws. Not many high school kids do. The high school he's at Lake Mary, they've got really good coaching. They throw it all over the place, and it's an aerial assault. So he'll come into college much more advanced than a lot of guys will.
All right, coming up, we'll break down why Mike Mickens is ranked among the best recruiters in college football. Plus, how will Chris Ash and Ja'Juan Seider shake things up on the recruiting trail? That's next on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is also brought to you by Fabric. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. You can get $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day, so protecting your loved ones doesn't have to break the bank. Fabric also offers free digital wills and access to investment accounts to help you plan for your children's future. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families today. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Price is subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, Brian, this week on 3's Steve Wiltfong recently named Mike Mickens as one of the 10 best recruiters in college football. How significant is that recognition, and what makes Mickens such an effective recruiter for Notre Dame?
He finds kids for his system that will fit his personality and do the job. I think Leonard Moore is a pretty safe pick as somebody that we knew was good, but we didn't know he was that good. I got word last summer that he'd improved. He'd gotten a little faster, a little bigger, stronger, kind of a late developer. So Notre Dame got a little bit lucky on it, but they prioritized him very early in the recruiting cycle. And the ironic part, he's from just outside of Austin, Texas. You don't get many kids from there that Texas would want, but they didn't really go after him. So I think number one, it would be evaluations for Mickens. And then two, it's just his relationship building. From every kid that I've ever spoken to that Mickens has recruited, DB or otherwise, he's a likable guy. I always ask people about off-the-record stuff, like which coaches are fun to talk to, et cetera. Mickens is somebody that comes up. Kids will always pick schools because they like them and stuff. But the biggest factor is still relationships. They're going to pick 9 out of 10 times the coach over the school. And Mickens is at Notre Dame, so Notre Dame reaps the benefits. Kids like him, and now he's got a track record too, so it's a lot easier. Putting some guys in the NFL consecutive years is going to help him. Notre Dame's in a great spot because Mickens is on the staff. Really, really good coach and really good recruiter.
It did seem like Texas took note of the fact that Leonard Moore ended up at Notre Dame and had so much success because they were pursuing him at one point to join their coaching staff, although it looks, at least as of this recording, that Mike Mickens is going to stick around with Notre Dame for at least one more year, even though he was not promoted to the full-time defensive coordinator spot. But one thing that I've been thinking about specifically since I saw that Mike Mickens was recognized as a top 10 recruiter is like, when we talk about college football and the superstars, they're usually coaches because they're the ones who are around long, whereas like all the best players are kind of in and out in 3 years or less most of the time. But for an assistant coach like Mike Mickens to get that kind of recognition, I think it means a lot because he is the one who the players deal with more often than not, specifically at their position. So when a coach like this, an assistant coach who's not even a defensive coordinator, how does that impact the reputation for the school and specifically that position? Because I think it's kind of an afterthought to people on the outside, but for the players, that's the person that they are dealing with way more than the head coach.
I think it's really important, especially at DB, a spot that it's a premium deal. If you look at the Final Four teams, Penn State, Notre Dame, Texas, Ohio State, all of those schools had multiple DBs that were probably going to go in the first couple rounds. That's why you get there, because everybody can throw the ball now. So if you don't have a DB coach that's got a rep, it's really hard. I don't care who your head coach is to win because you're not going to get enough players. So kind of like the general manager spot, you see all these millions of dollars going out. I just saw today that the GM at North Carolina gets getting like $1.5 million. DB coaches, I imagine, are going to be going up, especially the ones that are coveted like Mickens, because there's only so many. And if you don't have elite DB play, you have zero shot. So I think it's a massive thing, especially when Mickens is a nice guy. I've met him once. He's a really nice guy, very presentable. It's easy for your program to be sold in a positive light, having a guy like that. And I don't care what his title is. It's important. But again, DB, that's huge.
All right, let's talk about the guy who actually is Notre Dame's defensive coordinator now, and that's Chris Ash. He's known as a strong X's and O's mind, but how do you expect him to approach recruiting now that he's Notre Dame's defensive coordinator? Because he even admitted in his opening press conference on Wednesday that it is so much different than when he was last coaching in college.
This is a great question, and I imagine Notre Dame's going to feel it out a little bit, kind of like with the new GM hire and whoever they bring in for all the positions to back office. There'll be a little feeling out. More than anything else, the reason that Freeman hired him is they had the same vision for what they wanted to do defensively. Like Ash is very aggressive. I don't know if he'll be quite as aggressive as Al Golden. I mean, he was incredibly that much, but I think they're going to use him as a closer, probably more than anything else, kind of like Golden. They're going to be doing more time with the X's and O's because they lead the defense. He's still a guy that's been on a staff at Ohio State with Urban Meyer. So I know he can recruit. I know him. He will not hire you if you can't recruit. No chance. The only question I have is how long will it be before he's tired of the NIL game and all that stuff? Because like a lot of these coaches that have been at multiple levels, they really don't want to mess with it. It's the ultimate question because I'm sure he could be in the NFL too. I don't know. But he's a very well-respected coach from an X's and O's standpoint. I think he'll be the back-end guy in recruiting. It'll help finish the deal more than anything else. I don't know if he'll have a territory or anything else that they really want to give him, but he recruited at Ohio State, so he's recruited New Jersey. I would imagine he'll be an East Coast guy. That'll help out some too, but closer will be his main role.
So Notre Dame also made a big splash by hiring Ja'Juan Seider as running backs coach, who was previously with Penn State. What have been the early returns on the recruiting trail since he arrived in South Bend?
He's offered a few of the guys that he was recruiting at Penn State, including Messiah. Messiah Mickens, he's a powerfully built kid. I saw him recently, downhill runner, but there's other kids around the country because Penn State went national in the last couple of years. And I think Seider is literally the best assistant coach in the country at recruiting, if I can only pick one guy. Some will say Heartline, but I think Heartline, it's more just because of the position he recruits that makes it a little easier, and he's got Smith. But either one of them, they're elite. Seider does a great job for Penn State when he was recruiting South Florida. They've never gotten kids out of South Florida to even visit. So he turned that around. He would help him in Virginia, etc. And he's a closer. He can get kids that otherwise they wouldn't get. Nick Singleton would probably be playing for Notre Dame if it wasn't for Seider. He's an elite recruit. Like, he was all but set to go to Notre Dame, and Seider flipped him at the last second. He is elite at closing. So I think Notre Dame will see the benefits of him more next year after he's been around. Notre Dame knows how to sell it a little more. But there'll be somebody they get this year. I don't know if it'll be a running back, but it'll be because of him. Again, players pick coaches more than they pick schools. Like it or not, that's just reality. And Seider is as good as anyone in this business of recruiting.
I totally agree with you. And I think the fact that you would put him in the same breath as Brian Hartline means a lot. So do you think it's just his personality and he's built for recruiting? Is that what really separates him compared to everyone else?
That is a great way to put it. He enjoys the grind. And that's not something you can teach. Either you want to do this, again, NIL era, or you do not. Some guys are good at it and some are not. Someone can, kind of halfway fake it and get through, but to break in, like what Penn State's always just recruited the North, occasionally gotten a kid from North Carolina or Georgia, and that was it. They're getting kids out of Florida to visit and getting kids over Florida State and Miami. That's never happened in my lifetime. I'm 51 years old. So he's a different kind of recruiter, and that takes effort. And he's from South Florida. So that also helps. Notre Dame's not going to recruit a ton of South Florida kids or anywhere else because they're academic and everything. But if you just add one really good player from South Florida a year, it changes your roster. Who knows? Maybe it'll be a running back. Maybe it won't. But he will get Notre Dame in places that they hadn't before. But he's also a guy that's going to help you in PA and Virginia and D.C., areas that Notre Dame has been very active in anyway. So it'll be interesting to see Notre Dame and Penn State butt heads here the next few years with him flipping sides.
Brian, this has been great as always. But before we let you go, tell the audience everything you've got going on because you're doing a lot of great work and I want to make sure they know where to find you.
Yeah, we just started the new podcast called The Portal, and it is a lot of fun. It is transfer portal, obviously, but NIL and recruiting are what dominate it. National perspective, Notre Dame, Texas, Florida State, Michigan, USC, anybody you can imagine. Who's recruiting who, why, all on the portal. You can find it on anything you want to, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all those different places. Started the 1st of February. So it is a brand new channel. It's a lot of fun, though.
All right, man. Thanks so much for the time. Take care.
Take care.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. No Friday mailbag tomorrow. Instead, I'm going to be debuting something new on the show, and I'm pretty excited about it. Should be a lot of fun, and I think it's a great way to get us through this offseason. Remember to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. That way you never miss an episode or all the fun new stuff we're doing here on the show. Also, a reminder, if you're watching along on YouTube, please remember, like this video below, or if you're listening to the podcast, please rate the show 5 stars and leave a review on your preferred platform. I'll see you Friday.